In the small village of Umuodo, Nwakego and Obichi welcomed their first child, Udenna. Nwakego was known for her fiery spirit and sharp tongue, while Obichi was a humble and hardworking farmer. They both saw in Udenna the actualization of their dreams. From the moment he was born, they poured all their love and aspirations into him. Udenna was a bright, curious boy who quickly won the hearts of everyone in the village. The elders called him Nwa Umuodo, meaning the child of Umuodo, believing he was destined for greatness. Some years later, they had a daughter, Adannaya, whom they also loved and cherished. However, they focused more on Udenna and his education. Nwakego and Obichi sacrificed everything for their only son's education. While other children played, Udenna studied. While other families celebrated, Nwakego and Obichi worked extra hours in the farm to afford his school fees. Their efforts paid off when Udenna excelled in school. He was always at the top of his class. Nwakego proudly boasted about her son's achievements, dreaming of the day when he would rise above their humble beginnings and bring honor to the family. Whenever she was in the midst of her fellow women, she would brag and say things like, "It's not about having so many children, no. How many of your sons can measure up to my one and only golden boy, Udenna?" She would walk with her head held high in mockery of the other women who couldn't afford to send their children to school. As Udenna grew, so did his accomplishments. He became the first from his village to receive a scholarship to study at a prestigious university in the city. Nwakego and Obichi could not have been prouder. Their dreams were coming true. They hosted a grand send-off for Udenna, complete with drumming, dancing, and feasting. The entire village celebrated. They saw Udenna's success as a beacon of hope for all of Umuodo. The night before the day Udenna was to leave for the city to begin his university education, his parents made sure to give him some words of advice. "Udenna, my son," Obichi said, with pride as he placed a hand on Udenna's shoulder. "You are the light of this family. Remember who you are and where you come from." Udenna nodded, his eyes filled with determination. "I will, Papa. I promise to make you proud." Nwakego, with tears of joy streaming down her cheeks, added, "My golden boy, you carry all our hopes with you. Please never forget that." "Yes, Mama," Udenna replied, hugging her tightly. "I will not disappoint you." They continued to discuss late into the night. When they were sure they had armed him with all the motivation, advice, and encouragement he would be needing for a successful stay at the university, they let him retire for the night. Early the next morning, Udenna packed his bags, filled with both excitement and fear, and left for the university, where he would pursue a degree in electrical electronics engineering. The boy from the humble family of Mr. and Mrs. Obichi was ready to change his world. Udenna was more than just another student. He was a star. In every class, he would sit in the front row and raise his hands at the slightest opportunity to answer or to ask a question. His lecturers noticed his enthusiasm and dedication. Within the first year, Udenna had become a top student, doing exceptionally well in every course with ease. His understanding of complex engineering concepts, combined with his passion for learning, earned him admiration from his classmates and lecturers alike. His notes were always the reference point of his lecturers. Udenna became popular in the university library because there was never a day he didn't go to study in the library. His friends often joked that he must have been born with a calculator in his hand. Every exam was a walk in the park for him, and every project he did was a masterpiece. Udenna was confident that he was well on his way to becoming a brilliant electrical electronics engineer. But beneath all the accolades and success, there was something he didn't know could turn his world upside down. The day Udenna discovered the truth was like every other day. It was in his 5th year in the university. He left his hostel that morning without having even the slightest idea of the drastic turn his life would take. That morning, he headed to the admissions office. As he walked in, he noticed the serious-looking face of Mrs. Ruth, the registrar, which was unlike her. She called him over, and with a deep sigh, she dropped a bombshell that shattered his dreams. "Udenna, there is a problem with your examination records," she said. "You did not make a credit in one of your O-level subjects. You need a credit in that subject to be eligible for graduation from the university, but you only scored a pass." Udenna's heart sank. How could this be? What was this he was hearing? This sounded like an expensive joke to him. But when he saw that Mrs. Ruth was very serious about what she had just told him, he began to ask himself questions to understand how this must have happened. The harder he tried to understand how this happened, the more confused he became. The O-level examination results he had printed out showed he had only A's and B's, but now, on the computer, his results looked entirely different. Still feeling broken and in great confusion, Udenna approached the university board. He protested, pleaded, and even tried to explain how much he had achieved. But the rules were the rules. He was not eligible to graduate. All his hard work, the sleepless nights, the countless hours of study, it all meant nothing without that piece of paper. The only option for Udenna to graduate the university with a degree was to sit for his O-level examinations again and get a fresh admission into the school. But he was too ashamed to do that. He told himself that he had already come too far to go back to such level now, and nothing would make him go to a high school classroom and rewrite examinations with students he was far older than. He imagined the mockery and insults he would receive. He weighed this option, and then he concluded that he would rather drop out of the university than suffer such humiliation. Although it wasn't an easy choice for him, Udenna eventually dropped out of the university. With no degree, Udenna's dream of becoming an engineer seemed like it had vanished into thin air. He dropped out and returned to Umuodo. Udenna's unfortunate return to Umuodo changed everything about his life and family. Obichi's heart sank. He had placed all his hopes in Udenna, believing that his son would bring light to their family. His wife, Nwakego, took this news even worse. She could not hold back her disappointment with the son she had once adored and boasted of. What was once love turned into a silent resentment. She could not bear the whispers in the village about Udenna's failed education, and unknown to Udenna, his mother's heart began to change towards him. Her affection shifted elsewhere to her daughter's newborn son, Utitochukwu. Udenna's sister Adannaya had found herself in a difficult situation. She got pregnant out of wedlock. Everyone thought that Nwakego would hate Adannaya and her son, born out of wedlock too, the way she now resented Udenna. But that was not the case, because despite the social stigma, Nwakego saw in Utitochukwu a chance to restore her shattered dreams. She loved the child so much, showering him with the affection she no longer felt for Udenna. In her eyes, this little boy was the new hope of the family, the one who would achieve all that Udenna had failed to accomplish. Slowly, Nwakego began to also turn Obichi against Udenna. She whispered doubts into Obichi's ears. "You see how Udenna has changed," she would say to him. "He has lost his way. Perhaps We should consider shifting our attention to Otitochukwu. Maybe he will bring the light we desire for this family. At first, Obichi resisted the things she said. He knew his beloved son was a good boy. But the whispers continued, and like water dripping on a stone, they began to wear him down. One day, Udenna came to his father asking for some money to start a small business. "Papa, I have a plan," he explained earnestly. "I want to start a small business of repairing electronic gadgets. I've thought it through and I think it will yield good profits." But before Obichi could reply, Nwakego cut in. "Obi, do you see? Instead of working hard, he wants to take shortcuts. This boy has become lazy, just like all those city boys." Obichi, confused and hurt, turned his back on his son. From that day on, father and son began to drift apart. Nwakego's favoritism increased. She began to divert the few properties which Obichi had managed to acquire over the years towards Adannaya's son, although this inheritance rightfully belonged to Udenna and his sister Adannaya. Nwakego's bitterness towards Udenna increased with each passing day, clouding her judgment and leading her to take drastic measures. Udenna, still struggling with his own sense of failure, remained largely unaware of his mother's betrayal. He tried to make a life for himself, working odd jobs in the village. He decided to use what he had learned practically. He started doing small repair jobs around the neighborhood, fixing radios and any other electronic devices people brought to him for repairs. However, these jobs were only for a short period of time. People admired his skills, but every time he tried to get a proper job, employers would ask for a university certificate. "No certificate, no job," they would say. And so Udenna remained trapped in a cycle of menial job, using his brilliant mind to scrape together a meager living. His condition made the villagers murmur. Some said he was under a spell that controlled his life and made him useless, while some said he was just a lazy man who got tired of life in university. Meanwhile, Udenna could feel the growing chill in his father's gaze and the coldness in his voice. "Papa, why don't you trust me anymore?" he would plead. But all he got in return was a dismissive wave of the hand or a harsh word. "You disappointed us, Udenna," Obichi would say, looking away. During these hard times of Udenna's life, he met Okachi, a warm-hearted and supportive young woman who worked as a teacher. She loved him so much that his present condition did not matter to her. Okachi was drawn to Udenna's kind nature and determination despite his struggles. She believed that Udenna was eventually going to rise above his limitations and become very successful. She became a source of comfort and strength for him. They shared dreams of a better future and supported each other through their challenges. Their bond deepened and they fell in love, providing Udenna with a renewed sense of hope. "Okachi, you are the light in this dark place," Udenna confessed one evening. "I don't know where I would be without you." "You would still be Udenna," Okachi replied, smiling softly. "Strong, determined, and kind. I see the man you are becoming, not the one you fear you are." Udenna took her hand, his heart full for the first time in a long while. "Thank you for believing in me, Okachi. Let's build a life together." And so they did. Udenna and Okachi married in a simple, small ceremony, since that was what they could afford. Soon, Okachi and Udenna welcomed their first child, a boy they named Uchenna, followed by another child, a girl they named Ifunanya. Nwakego's favoritism towards Otitochukwu became increasingly evident. She saw in him the potential that she believed Udenna had squandered, and she continued to divert her attention and resources towards ensuring Otitochukwu's success. She showered him with gifts, enrolled him in the best school, and boasted about his achievements to anyone who would listen. Nwakego's actions isolated Udenna and his family further, deepening the division within the household. "Mama, you haven't even asked how Uchenna is doing in school," Ukachi gently pointed out one afternoon. "Why should I?" Nwakego fired back. "It is Otitochukwu who will bring honor to this family, not your children." Ukachi was hurt, but held her tongue. She knew Nwakego's words were rooted in deep-seated resentment. As time went on, Obichi's health began to decline. He became critically ill to the point of being bedridden. The state of his health grew so worse that he hardly was conscious of the happenings around him. Even his memory weakened. Nwakego continued to tighten her grip. She took over the farmlands, the house, and all the decision-making. Udenna, despite the distance his father had created, remained close by, visiting secretly to care for him. But Nwakego made sure to paint Udenna as a greedy opportunist. "He's only here to take what's left of you," she would say, her voice dripping with hatred. One fateful evening, as Obichi lay in his bed, frail and breathless, Udenna held his hand and whispered, "Papa, I have always loved you. I never wanted to hurt you. I just couldn't bear the shame of going back to sit in class with the children who were far younger than me." Obichi looked into his son's eyes, and for a moment the fog seemed to lift, but it was too late. His heart had been poisoned, not just by illness, but by the seeds of doubt his wife had sown over the years. Obichi passed away quietly that night. Years passed, and Udenna remained trapped in the cycle of menial jobs. His potential never fully realized. The villagers who once hailed him as the son of Omodu now looked on with pity. Udenna's fall from grace was fatal. His story was always on the lips of the village gossips. He became known as the engineer without a certificate. As he grew older, the weariness of both his unfulfilled dreams and his mother's resentment weighed heavily on him. He desperately desired to make peace with his mother. Driven by her obsessive need to secure Otitochukwu's future, Nwakego began to devise a wicked plan to eliminate Udenna's family from the equation. She attempted to poison the food at a family gathering, aiming to harm Okachi and Udenna's children. However, her plans were thwarted when Okachi, sensing that something wasn't right, insisted on cooking the meal herself. "Mama, I'll handle the cooking today," Okachi said, smiling but firm. "Why? Do you think my food is not good enough?" Nwakego snapped at her. "No, Mama, I just want to make a special meal for the family," Okachi replied calmly, but her eyes never left Nwakego, sensing the underlying threat. Nwakego was frustrated because her plan did not work out, but she did not give up. She made several more attempts, each time finding her plans foiled by the vigilance and care of Okachi and Udenna. More years passed, but Udenna never suspected that anything concerning his inheritance was amiss. He wasn't in a hurry to claim his inheritance, so he didn't bother much. He never imagined the extent of his mother's betrayal. He continued to work hard, hoping to prove himself, but Nwakego still resented him deeply, not just for his failure, but for the reminders of her own unfulfilled dreams. Her bitterness grew, turning into something more dangerous. She desperately wanted to get rid of what she perceived as a burden and an obstacle to Otitochukwu's future. This desperation led Nwakego to her most drastic action. One evening, she invited the entire family for a special dinner, cooking Udenna's favorite dish. Udenna accepted the invitation despite Okachi's reservations. He was hopeful that this was the first step towards mending their broken relationship. Okachi, however, came up with an excuse to prevent her and her children from eating the dinner prepared by Nwakego. As the family gathered around the table, Nwakego watched with cold intent. Udenna ate heartily, believing that his mother was finally making peace between them. And for a moment, it felt like old times. Hours after the meal, Udenna fell violently ill. He complained of severe stomach pains, nausea, and dizziness. Okachi rushed to get help, but by the time the village doctor arrived, it was too late. Udenna succumbed to the poison, his life cut short by the very person who had once loved him the most. Udenna's death sent Okachi and her children into a period of mourning and suspicion. It left a void in their family that could not be filled. The village was thrown into shock. Okachi, who was left to raise her 2 children alone, became more vigilant. She feared for her children's safety, knowing that Nwakego's resentment had not been buried with Udenna. Nwakego, on the other hand, did not show any signs of mourning, and this stirred up the suspicion of other members of the family, including the villagers. She was happy that her plans to make Otitochukwu the heir to Obichi's inheritance were falling into place. Again, she began plotting a way to eliminate late Udenna's children, because now that their father was no more, their tradition demanded that every inheritance meant for their late father be passed down to them. Nwakego distanced herself from the rest of the family, becoming more secretive and isolated. Although she tried to act strong, whispers in the village about her possible involvement in Udenna's death grew louder. Nwakego could feel the weight of suspicion in every gaze and every conversation that stopped when she approached. As time passed, what once seemed like a justified plan to secure the light of the family now felt like a very heavy burden. Nwakego could hardly sleep. Her dreams were always haunted by visions of Udenna. Her actions seemed to catch up with her. She began to suffer from an unexplainable illness that no doctor could diagnose. It started with constant fatigue, then progressed to severe joint pains and unrelenting headaches. As the illness took hold, her once intimidating presence faded away. She could barely manage to get out of bed. Her condition baffled both traditional healers and modern doctors, and despite numerous treatments and rituals, nothing could ease her suffering. The villagers whispered that Nwakego's illness was a punishment from God for her sins against her own son. Some said that Udenna's spirit was restless, seeking justice for the wrong things done to him. Nwakego too began to believe that she was paying the price for her past, but it didn't stop her. Nwakego's death was slow and painful. Her illness worsened, and she became bedridden. One day, she called for Otitochukwu, whose mind she had also tried to poison against late Udenna and his family. She opened up about her wicked intentions to Otitochukwu, still desperate to secure his future. But when he arrived at her bedside, all he could offer was a cold stare. Without minding anything, he voiced out what everyone had been suspecting. "You ruined everything, Grandma," Otitochukwu said quietly. "Your hatred destroyed this family. Why did you send Uncle Udenna, your only son, to his early grave?" With eyes filled with tears, Nwakego replied, "I did all this for you, Otitochukwu. Udenna brought shame to me. He ruined all my dreams of having a better life, and he made me, the once proud mother of Nwamodu, a laughing stock to everybody in this village." "But at what cost, Grandma?" Otitochukwu replied, his voice bitter. "I have nothing now, not even a family." Nwakego died a few days later, alone and unloved. Her death marked the end of a tragic chapter for the family. Otitochukwu exposed Nwakego and her evil deeds to Okachi and her children, and returned everything which Nwakego had stolen from late Udenna to them. Many years later, late Udenna's children grew up to be very successful young adults. Rather than use the inheritance for themselves, they worked very hard to acquire their own wealth, and then they honored their father's memory by using the restored inheritance to fund educational initiatives in Omodo. They established a scholarship fund in Udenna's name to help other young students pursue their dreams, ensuring that the mistakes of the past would not be repeated. Papa would be very proud of us, Ifunanya said one evening to Okachi. We've turned his story into something beautiful. Okachi smiled. Yes, my dear, we've shown that even in loss, there is a way to rise. Okachi and her children found healing and transformed their pain into purpose. The moral lesson of this story is that we should be mindful of our desire for status and wealth, as these desires, if not controlled, can lead to one's downfall. Nwakego's actions were driven by her obsessive ambition for wealth, which ultimately destroyed her family and her own peace. Also, true wealth is found in the love, unity, and integrity of a family. The story shows that no amount of material gain can replace the bonds of family and the peace of a clear conscience. Thank you for watching this video. If you enjoyed this story, please like, subscribe, and share this video with everyone whom you think will be inspired by this story. Don't forget to tell me in the comment section what other lessons you think we can learn from the story. Until my next story, bye.